Hello, Barbara here, and welcome to another episode of Lessons from Leaders. Now, today I'm really excited to be introducing Richard Maxwell. Now, Richard has recently retired after 40 years in management and leadership roles. He's got such a wealth of experience. He's been in heavy engineering and in mining industries. He's had 20 years in the food manufacturing, supplying UK retail and global restaurant brands. He's also a qualified mechanical engineer, and he's had roles including running a number of processing factories. He's been an operations director and main board business director, as well as the managing director, both here in the UK and in the USA. So I know that you are going to get loads of tips from this conversation. So settle back, get yourself a cup of tea and a notepad and pen, and just enjoy. So hi Richard, thanks so much for joining us today. So I know you've had a really varied career, so can you just describe your journey for us, because just to let everybody know what you've been up to?
Yeah, certainly. So I guess I started my career as an apprentice draftsman many years ago. I worked in a big drawing office, so mechanical engineer by trade. Realised after a number of years that an office environment wasn't really that compelling for me back then. So that was with British Coal. So I ended up being a management trainee then with British Coal in mechanical engineering. Got my engineering qualifications, mining qualifications, then became the youngest, if you like, chief engineer as it was back then, with British Coal at 25, statutorily that's the age you have to be. Worked at many different coal mines, in different mechanical engineering roles, chief engineering roles, that type of thing, looking after underground maintenance, surface maintenance, shaft work, all that kind of stuff. Left British Coal in '94 into the food industry, working for Cargill, where I spent 24 years, primarily in their food manufacturing businesses, poultry, chicken, servicing UK retail, McDonald's, the big retailers in the UK, quick service restaurants. Became managing director of that business, and then progressed from the engineering manager through to factory manager, general manager, board level, to managing director. And then within Cargill businesses, they own salt mines in the United States. So the managing director job came up there. I was retiring, and I got a phone call, asked would I go and run that business in America, which I did for the last 6.5 years. So running their salt businesses in America, predominantly mining for rock salt, for road safety, throughout the US. So we were the biggest rock salt producer in North America and Canada. So, and then very recently, about 6 months ago, came back to the UK and retired. So,
Fantastic.
Really retired.
You're living the dream now, yeah?
Trying to. It's taking some getting used to. But that was the dream, to retire early, so we'll see.
I can imagine. So you've only recently come back from the States, 6 months ago, did you say?
I finished work about 6 months ago. I came back just about a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for 6 months I was going backwards and forwards, doing the handover and also consolidating two businesses into one.
So how have you found coming back here?
It's all right, yeah. I mean, I was travelling back. I mean, it's getting used to retirement's still a challenge, I have to say, but we'll see. We'll see what it's like through the first winter.
Exactly, yeah. Whereabouts in the States were you?
I was based in Ohio,
right.
Cleveland, Ohio, but we had facilities in New York State, Cleveland, Ohio. I had 3 big mines, but also in Louisiana. But we had about 80 different distribution terminals right across the north central part of the snow belt of the USA. So extensive travel across the US. Yeah. Although I was based in Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh, that sounds fabulous.
Yeah, it was good.
So what I'm interested in, just listening to your journey, what I'm wondering is how did the challenges change, and how did leadership change for you as you went up the ranks?
Yeah, I guess leadership's no different than anything else. It's something that you learn and acquire and make mistakes on along the way. And I I've certainly made a lot of those. But I guess the enormity of the leadership roles increases as well. And also, quite frankly, I have to do a lot about the burdens of leadership, because what people don't sort of appreciate is there's burdens that comes along with it. Yes, you get well rewarded. Yes, you get a lot of nice lifestyle, but there's burdens with it as well. So as the roles got bigger, the geography I was operating, whether I was here in Europe, because although I was based in the UK, I was also running factories in Belgium and France and Holland. So the challenges just, were different, whether it's language challenges, cultural challenges, even the US to the UK, very different work ethics and work challenges, different ways of doing things. So as you go through your life and go through your career, just learning those experiences, and learning what to do and learning from your failures has been quite a challenge. And I got to say, quite an enjoyable challenge, I have to say. So yeah, very different challenges depending on what business I was in, whether I was in coal, food manufacturing, raw chicken farming, salt, very different challenges, different geographies, different people. But fundamentally, I don't think much really changes. I think the fundamentals are pretty solid.
So what would you say the fundamentals are?
Well, I guess, I always start with people. As an old engineer that used to build things and repair things, I learned very early in my career that people were a lot more interested in the machinery. And I say that as a very reasonably successful engineer, and I still like engineering, but I think it became very evident to me that I much more enjoyed working through people and with people than I did building things, hands-on building things. So I think the biggest fundamental is people. So I've always believed in engagement. My mantra has always been one of three things: keep your people safe, engage your people, and achieve your results. So if I made a career out of those three things. I noticed in one of your questions in your it was about the three things you wanted. That was the easiest question to answer. So keep your people safe, engage your people, and achieve the results that you promise. But yeah, I still think people, it all comes down to people, and increasingly so in today's world. And I know it's a bit of an old mantra, it's a bit of a strap line, but I don't know any good leaders that aren't good with people.
So I completely agree. So how did you engage with your people then? That was mantra number 2.
Well, I think there's various things. I think your own personal style is one of them. The reality of it is that I think you also have to challenge yourself to do it as well. I think there's an element of empathy there, whether you've got it or haven't got it. Emotional intelligence comes into it. I think coming through the ranks and building the experiences, you sort of know what people need and want, rather than make assumptions. I've always been one for asking very challenging questions, and I want to be challenged. So I like an environment where people challenge me and disagree with me. And I think that creates a high level of engagement as well. If people feel they can challenge the boss and their voice is being listened to, I think it's very, very empowering and very stimulating. So I've always tried to create those environments, even as a young supervisor that lacked experience and lacked knowledge, making sure you sort of really, teasing out all the little gems of knowledge and experience from people. So I think fundamentally it's about talking to them at their level. I've been very privileged to my career to operate at very different levels, but what I've always tried to do is maintain a communication style that's relevant to their level and their knowledge and their understanding, rather than trying to use buzzwords or fancy management speak, if you like. And I've always been very successful at that, as I have great feedback. I think feedback's also a great tool if you're prepared to accept the feedback. Sometimes it's tough getting feedback, but it's very empowering and very enlightening for subordinates and peers to give you feedback if you're prepared to listen to it and welcome it. I had an old boss many years ago who used to say, feedback was the food of champions, and I think it was a very true comment.
Yeah.
So I think if you're prepared to listen to feedback and act upon it, and you create an environment where people are prepared to challenge you and be challenged, I think that helps the environment of engagement. But I also think if people see that you have their interests at heart and not your own interests at heart, that's also quite powerful as well.
Mm. So I'm interested, Richard, when you say that you created a challenge, a culture rather, that where your team could challenge you, and you like to be challenged, and they can disagree with you in a safe place. It's safe to disagree with you. Mm-hmm. And you did that quite early on in your career when you were quite new, as a supervisor. So how do you do that? How did you create that environment where people felt safe to challenge and disagree with the boss?
I think I guess the obvious answer is I'm not really sure if there's a script. I guess to a certain degree you are what you are. I've always been, I came from my father was a coal miner. I'm a big family, it was first up, best dressed when I was growing up, first at table 8. So it was very competitive even as a kid. You were very competitive just to survive in your family environment. You mind at school and anything else. So I'm hugely competitive. But I've always been encouraged to just ask questions, be inquisitive. And if that's good enough for me, why isn't that good enough for everybody else? So, I've always been allowed to ask questions, allowed to make mistakes, learn from those, move on, never felt silly asking questions. So I guess those are some very deep-rooted beliefs I have, that asking questions is part of life. And I like that environment where it can be challenging and people ask questions and I'd be asked questions of without feeling too intense. That's difficult. It doesn't happen overnight. You have to build trust, and trust is a very small word that's banded around a lot, but boy, does it take a lot to build trust. And one thing you learn as you go through your leadership career, you can destroy trust very, very quickly, not by what you say, but by what you do, the actions, the way you react to situations. So building trust is very difficult, and maintaining trust is even harder. But building an environment where people trust your intentions, I think is really important. I pick the words very carefully because I think sometimes you're going to get it wrong. But I think if your intentions are good and honourable, I think people trust that and they still believe in that. But I think also, it's easy to say don't shoot the messenger. A lot of people say it but don't follow that through. And I've many examples where I've not followed that through. But I think my intentions have always been very honourable. So my intentions are in a very open, inclusive environment where people's voices are heard and people can thrive. My intentions have always been there. Doesn't necessarily mean I've executed it all the time, but I think people recognise that. And one of the things I've been very proud of, one of the questions was, the teams and the individuals you've developed, because that's ultimately what you get judged on.
Yeah.
And what people remember.
Yeah. So what, if you were to look back to that supervisor, many years ago, you were the supervisor, what advice would you give to yourself or to other people that are just starting out?
Yeah, I think it will sound like a broken record, but it's that listen, ask and learn, And it's so easy to say, and certainly in today's society where everybody thinks they know everything and everything's so Googleable. But having the time to listen, ask and learn without feeling, pressurized that you've got to deliver all the time, I think is quite important. I've always been a big believer in good fail. My biggest learnings as an individual, as a manager, as a leader, have come through the dark times of my life. The tough times at work are the biggest learning opportunity. I know many people say that, but I can assure you it's true. So again, when I advise young supervisors, and I look back on my career, don't be afraid to fail. but make sure that failing is supported. Don't go off and be a maverick. Make sure what you're doing is understood, that you have the support mechanisms around you, but don't be afraid to fail. I've always believed, excuse me, I've always been a big believer in that problems are best solved at the level at which they occur. So let the people at that level sort them problems out, just give them the opportunity, the materials, the time, the expertise to go solve them. Because, you know, when you try and solve all the problems from the top down, it doesn't work. And equally, if you try and solve all the problems from the bottom up, it doesn't work. So they'd be a few things, you know, let people solve problems that are occurring at their level and give them the opportunity to do that. That's how they'll grow and how they'll develop. Don't be afraid to fail, and above all, listen, ask and learn.
Yeah, love those. I mean, there's so much learning there, and it's really, I just want to dig into a couple of things that you said, if that's all right. In terms of that juggle between making time to listen and delivering. And this is something that I see a lot of people struggling with, you know, because they feel compelled to be delivering all of the time. And then they struggle to make that time to listen to their teams. How did you manage that?
I learned very early in my, you know, to be fair, I've been very blessed to work for a company called Cargill, who are a pretty progressive global company. And we talk a lot about what we call situational leadership, because different situations require different leadership. Yeah. And I think a lot of early leaders think they have to be super consistent. The problem is, being super consistent means, you know, you may manage different situations, try and be consistent, but you're not doing it correctly. Yeah. So situational leadership, you know, you stand by your beliefs, you stand by what you stand for. You know, your core never changes. But I think the reality of it is that different situations are going to require different leadership styles. So there will be times when you need to just say, enough debate, we're going to do this, because time's running out. You know, there's a very critical situation developing. So, you know, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it this way. There's other times when you have the opportunity to say, you know, we can have time to discuss, we can have time to decide, and we'll then have time to execute and support the decision. Yeah. And there'll be certain circumstances that you want to create to give people development opportunities. So you give them more time, you give them safe boundaries to operate in, and so you let them get on with that. You set up feedback situations and updates, but there'll be other times when things are just going horribly wrong, where you just got to step in and take control, for want of a better terminology. Well, then it comes back to, well, what's your intent? Was your intent to preserve the business, or was your intent to try and take glory away from the team? Because they'll look at it very differently. If the intent of stepping in was to save a situation or stop a situation getting out of control, I think people see that intent and see that as, okay, may not have reacted the way we would have liked because it didn't give us the time and the opportunity, but we understand. But equally, you know, I think people need time and guidance and coaching in order to learn themselves. That's what I was given. I'm no different than anybody else. My needs aren't that significantly different than most folks. But I think ultimately you've got to have a sense of your own self-worth, your own self-confidence. Your experiences kick in, your knowledge kicks in. And sometimes situational leadership will kick in and require you to manage differently for different situations. Yeah. But I think ultimately it's down to the intent. What was the intent?
Yeah, and I think it's so important, isn't it, to kind of check in with what is the intent here. You know, what is it that I want to happen? So again, I do want to check into talking about that good fail, because I love that idea of being able to fail and being that and providing again that environment where it is okay to fail. So how did you do that? How did you enable your team to know that it was okay to fail, that that's where the learning opportunities would be?
Yes. Forgive me if I rabble on too much, because
it's good. It's all good.
There's a number of things, you know, what I've learned, and I've never particularly read anything about it, but I have a strong belief about something called boundary management. I'm sure there must be a book around it. I've never read it, but so I'm a big believer in boundary management. So creating a boundary, a safe boundary around yourself, around your team, around your organisation, of what's safe to operate in. And so if you take an individual and you say, well, you've got to have the conversation, so I'm a big believer in appraisals,
Mm-hmm.
Sitting down on a regular basis, having formal appraisals, creating a safe boundary for someone to operate in. And whether that's a financial, because this boundary can be lots of different things. It can be financial, it can be operational, it can be people skills, it can be a whole range of different things that you want that individual to develop in. But if you set those boundaries and say you can operate within that boundary with autonomy, then you've created a relatively safe environment for them to fail in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you say to someone, like on a trading desk, if I give you £10,000 worth of trading tolerance and you go off and do $1 million and lose $1 million, then you've stepped outside the boundary, and that's a big problem. But I think if you operate within the boundaries that you've agreed, then actually you've contained it if it fails. So you don't have reasonably junior or middle management making big failures, because in the grand scheme of things, a supervisor making a £10,000 failure, it's not a big problem to the organisation, but it's a massive learning to that individual.
Mm-hmm.
And then as they develop and as they get better at, you can stretch those different boundaries. As they get more financially responsible, stretch his financial responsibilities. As they get better at people management, stretch those responsibilities. So you manage the stretch of the boundary. And a boundary is not necessarily linear. It can be like a star. It can have points on it as you develop in strong different areas. So that's one way of containing the risk, because ultimately failure is about risk. It's about risk for the individual. It's about risk for the organisation. So you've got to manage the risk, knowing that if something goes wrong, how do I contain that risk? And I think that's good for both parties. So that's also part of that. I think the other side of that is what you don't want is people going off making failures on their own, because it's incredibly lonely if you fail and you're suddenly out on a limb and you've got no friends around you, you've got no support mechanism. So again, if you're making decisions that have any risk of failure, making sure you have a support mechanism around you where you can talk it through, you can plan it, because that's the other thing, making sure you planned it well. I don't mean to be rude, but I talk about the 7 Ps, piss poor planning produces piss poor performance. So if you plan it well and it goes wrong, it's very difficult to criticize a team or an individual saying, why did that go wrong? I'm now going to chastise you. If the planning was good and the intent was good, sometimes you can't always control the outcome. And so I think having those mechanisms around you that say you planned it well, but you weren't in control of the outcome. So let's just learn from that. How can we plan better? But also making sure you're not isolated. So if things do go wrong, there's mechanisms around you that can help and support you, so you don't feel, because the problem with failing small, if you feel you're going to get chastised, you don't tell anybody. And that small failure, like a snowball, it keeps growing and growing and growing and growing until it gets so big that it then becomes an issue for the organisation. And that brings me back to the boundary. If you can fail within your boundaries and have a safe environment to say, look, I've tried this, it didn't work, but it's minimal impact to the organisation, that's a good learning opportunity. And thirdly, quite frankly, none of us are perfect. And I learned very early in my career, I'm an 80-20 kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
I really am. Whether it's in most things in life, I'm an 80-20 kind of guy. And so if you create an environment where people are not allowed to fail, the 2 out of 10 when they'll fail, they'll be so focused and paranoid about that, you never get the 8 good decisions, the 8 good acts, the 8 good pieces of work that moves the individual, the team, and the organisation forward. So I'm still an 80-20 kind of guy. You're going to get 80% of it right, and that takes you further forward than the 20% that drags you back. So
yeah, no, I completely completely agree. And I love the fact that you see everything as a learning opportunity, you know, and a way of developing. So look, sort of tapping into that a bit further, what do you think what are the most common mistakes that you have learned from?
Common mistakes. So I'm not sure it's a mistake, but certainly one of my downfalls is impatience. That's a mistake. I'm not sure. It's certainly something that I consciously try to avoid.
How did that manifest itself then, that impatience?
Oh, I'm always. I think I'm so competitive.
Right.
Sometimes I can be so driven, and I want to do everything the right way. But sometimes getting the job done can sometimes get in the way. So I get impatient, and I think you know, I've done emotional intelligence courses and all that kind of stuff, and one of the things that has been pointed out to me a lot, I'm a very fast thinker, and so I process things very quickly. The problem is other people don't necessarily process to the same speed, and so I get frustrated sometimes that why haven't they got it? Why aren't they where I am in that same space of time? And that leads to frustrations on both parties.
Yeah, I find that, sorry to interrupt, I find that really interesting because, yeah, I've had conversations around that before in terms of how do you manage that process then? If you're 2 or 3 steps ahead, what do you do? Do you find that you're slowing yourself down, or do you find yourself filling in the gaps so the other person, you know, gets there quicker? What's your process for managing that?
It goes right back to what we said earlier about situational leadership.
Okay.
Because in some situations I don't want to slow down. I want to keep moving forward. In other situations I'm thinking, well, there's no benefit for me doing that. Actually, there's more benefit for me slowing down and letting others speed up, because the learning for the organisation is significantly higher. And the fact I might be wrong. And so sometimes you've got to look in the mirror and say, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I need to slow down. Maybe I need to put the brakes on. And so I think having that little bit of emotional intelligence that says, I know myself, I know what I'm good at, I know what I'm bad at. And what I'm bad at can actually have even though some people will see it as a positive trait, can actually have a negative impact sometimes. And so I think just reminding yourself, and also having people around you that, it goes back to what we said earlier, having people around you that's going to slap you and say, Richard, stop. Stop, you're doing it again. You're rushing off. You're not letting people catch up. So you can have people around you that are prepared to also give you some tough love.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, again, that's so important. And because you created that environment where people were able to do that, it helps both parties.
And I've had that many times.
So again, sorry, go.
Sorry, I'm not sure that answered your last question, but
no, I think it does. I think it did. So looking back then, how did you keep developing and growing yourself? Because we've talked a lot about helping your team to develop. So what did you do to develop yourself and keep yourself up to date and just able to manage effectively and lead effectively?
Yeah, and that's actually quite a challenge, because as you become a lead, what I also learned in my career is keeping hold of the things that you like may reward yourself, but it's really bad for the team. It's bad for the organisation. And I see some people, some leaders who cherry pick the good stuff, and that's a really bad thing to do. Because if you're taking the good stuff, that means the rest of the team, the rest of the organisation get the crap.
Mm-hmm.
And you almost want the reverse of that. You want to pass the good stuff to the team that's got the biggest learning opportunity. Because I've been there, I've done it. Why do I want to keep hold of something that maybe I may be good at it and I may like doing it, but I'm not getting the biggest learning opportunity from it. So being able to pass that down to others so that they get that same opportunity is tough, because we all want to migrate to things we like to do. So that is quite tough. So that's almost like a perverse side of that answer. But to challenge myself, I've been very fortunate because in my career, I've been promoted many times. I've gone to new businesses. I've gone to new geographies. And so I've always felt that just trying new things, doing new things is quite exciting. A lot of people and ah whether they should take this opportunity. If you've got faith in your bosses, you've got faith in your organization, they're giving you these opportunities for a reason. And so I've been very blessed really to travel the world, most countries around the world with the organization I work for, and do different things. And also, if the business is running pretty well, it gives you the opportunity to go and find new things, find new businesses to maybe buy, find new businesses to develop, look at the opportunities within your business, start to do things that take you outside your comfort zone. So I've never been constrained, which is good. I've never been constrained to go look for opportunities, but you got to make sure the day job is being run. And if you're passing good work down that's rewarding to people are engaged in the organization, that gives you a huge amount of freedom to go off and do other things. So, yeah, so you know, and I think your needs change as well as you know, the biggest buzz I used to get, I was coaching people, mentoring people, developing people. But when you're coming up through your career, that's the last thing you want. You're so focused on your results and yourself. And the last thing you want to do is spend days and weeks, you know, walking around, talking to folk and helping them. You just don't have time for that in your life. But as you get brighter, smarter, you work differently, you sit within an organization that gives you those opportunities and gives you the space to go develop other people. It's incredibly rewarding. But the other thing as well, you know, because there's obviously things like training courses, seminars, workshops. But the other thing I've always tried to do to keep myself relevant is go and find those coaches, go and find those mentors, go and find those subject matter experts, and go and spend some time with them. So if there's something I don't know and I want to know more, somebody in that organization will know. So go seek them out. It's incredibly rewarding for you as an individual, and it's incredibly rewarding for the person you're talking to. Imagine what it feels like when somebody comes to you and say, "You're our expert, please teach me this." So
yeah, it's so powerful, and I love the idea of freeing yourself up, you know, in terms of time, passing things on, delegating, moving, you know, things around so that you've got that space to go and be proactive and look for new opportunities.
Well, the slight problem is we're all successful doing the job we used to do. That's why we're successful, because you got promoted from it, and that's the reality of life, you know. And the danger is that you always migrate back to the job you used to do because you were good at it. By definition, you were good because you got promoted. But imagine what that feels like for the guy that you keep stepping in and stepping on his shoes and stepping on his toes. And so sometimes you have to consciously say, I've moved on. That person now is in charge. I've got to give them the space. And that's incredibly difficult. I've found a few of my promotions really quite tough because I still wanted to go back to the job I was doing.
It's your comfort zone, isn't it?
It's comfort zone.
Yeah.
And then nobody gives you a manual and said, this is your new job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've been promoted into a new job. Sometimes people aren't prescriptive about what that is. And so you have to figure that out. And you can make a lot of mistakes in that period because you're treading on someone else's toes. You won't let go. You still want to control the things you used to control. So having that self-consciousness about being able to move on, yes, you need a handover, but knowing how long that is and knowing when to trust the individual who's now got your old job is tough. Emotionally, it's tough. But so then you've got to go and find new challenges to keep yourself occupied. Because as soon as you get bored, you migrate backwards.
Yeah, so do you think that's all it what am I trying to say? Do you think that's how you do move on, just by keeping yourself occupied and consciously drawing a line in the sand that you've actually moved on and it's somebody else's role? Or how else do you think that you can transition easily?
Well, I think the reality of it is I think the world is moving so fast now. Change is moving so fast. Changes are constant. Maybe years ago, you know, people used to talk about, the management have changed. You know, in the last 20 years, the one constant I've seen in my career is change. So I think if you stand still, quite frankly, and you're not looking for improvements, and you're not looking for business improvements or people improvements, or you're looking for better talent, or you're trying to develop better talent, or you're trying to develop yourself, or you're trying to move your organization forward through improvements or acquisition or divestiture, the reality of it is changing. Change is exponentially getting faster and faster and faster. And so I think any leader, as they move through their career, they're gonna see and expected to manage more change than they have in the past, because things are just getting exponential now. So I think the very fact that change is a constant should motivate any leader just to keep moving forward. Because if you don't, you're not going to survive. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean you as an individual, but your team won't survive, your organization won't survive. So people who aren't motivated by change really do need to look in the mirror and say, do I want to be a leader, in my view? Yeah. Because it's a constant of the world we operate in today.
Yeah, we can't avoid it. It's not something that we can ignore and hide from. It's just there.
Some do. Some try to ignore.
I
agree. People, hate change. They get very frustrated, very anxious about it, and sometimes, unfortunately, there are victims of change. And I think that's what people tend to focus on. They focus on being a victim. Well, if that's where your focus or attention is, then it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you will become a victim of change.
Yeah.
What I see a lot in organizations is people who really thrive on change. And I don't mean chaos, I mean change. Chaos is a very different thing. But I think organizations who constantly recognize that they have to keep changing, they need leaders who are looking for those changes, looking for those opportunities. And so I think if you have that mindset, it stops you drifting back to your own job, because there's always something that needs improving.
Yeah.
Whether it's individuals, teams, organizations, there's always something need improving.
Yeah, you just have to give yourself permission to look for it.
And be comfortable, because change is uncomfortable.
Yeah. Just enjoy that discomfort, or just get used to it. So what are you most proud of then in your career? I know you've touched on a few things already.
I guess it falls into two camps, really. One is people, the other is obviously achievements. So I'm very pleased with, I could write a little list of teams and individuals that I know I've helped shape and develop, and the feedback I get from them, even now after many years, the emails you get occasionally. It's nice to see people continue to develop and grow, and take senior positions and do well. That gives me a lot of satisfaction. Yeah. I guess the other thing is back to what I said before, some of the most memorable situations I found myself in have been in really tough situations.
Yeah.
Businesses that need turnaround, really bad financial results, poor safety results. So turning those things around and having them sustainably turned around, because quite frankly, it ain't rocket science to turn a situation around, but to do that in a sustainable way so it's there for a long time, that gives me great satisfaction as well. And I've been very fortunate to do a few of those as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So one of the last question that I've got, Richard, for you, I ask everybody is, if you've got one book or podcast or something that you read regularly that you think could benefit our audience, what would it be?
So yeah, I saw that, and I've read a lot of books and I've seen a lot of podcasts, but I guess the one that stuck in my memory more than anything was Who Moved My Cheese?
We've had that one. Yeah, it's good.
It's a tiny thin book. You can read it in an hour.
Mm-hmm. I think I've got it here actually somewhere.
I read it many years ago. I've read it a few times since, and I quite like that, because it just sums up a lot of things maybe I've been talking about, about change management, about the ability to change, the willingness to change, the willingness to move on. And also the person who was successful in that book also wrote it on the walls for other people to learn from it. So it's not just about you making the changes and you making that. It's about sharing that and helping other people make change as well. So it's a very simple little book, but it's probably the one that sticks in my mind the most.
Yeah, no, I love it as well. I think it does exactly what it says on the tin, doesn't it? And I'm a big fan of making things as simple as possible. Why overcomplicate? So thanks so much for your time, Richard. I could genuinely talk to you all day. Thanks so much. I've really enjoyed it. Have you got one last takeaway or one last piece of learning that you think that other people would really? If there was one gem that you think, actually, if nothing else, do this, what would it be?
I guess one of my other little mantras, I guess, is I've been throwing them in through this discussion, is eat the elephant in bites. So problems seem so big and so complex these days. You know, what you got to do is just break it down into individual bite-sized pieces and share it. You know, give people different parts of that. So you know, I've often talked about, you know, eat the elephant in bites. So don't try and eat the elephant all in one go.
No. Fantastic. I love that. Eat the elephant in small bites. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Richard.
Okay.
And I'll hopefully talk to you soon.